One accidental voice message. And minutes later, a billionaire was standing at her door, changing her life forever. Sophie had always been a person who carried her emotions quietly, like a backpack filled with small, heavy stones. Every day she went to her job as a graphic designer in a busy city, surrounded by people who seemed to rush through life like they were always running late. The office was hectic. Deadlines piled up like mountains, and clients often demanded work that seemed impossible to deliver on time. She liked her job in many ways, let her be creative, gave her financial independence, and connected her to people who appreciated art, but some days were just exhausting. Today was one of those days. The morning had started with Sophie spilling coffee on her favorite blouse, a blouse she had chosen carefully for an important client presentation. The embarrassment alone had set the tone for the rest of the day. Then her computer decided to freeze right as she was about to submit a project, erasing half an hour of her painstaking work. On top of that, a colleague, unaware of the effort she had put in, critiqued her design in a harsh and unnecessary way. By the time lunch arrived, she barely had the energy to eat, instead staring out the window at the city below, wishing she could disappear for a few hours into a world where deadlines didn't exist and people weren't constantly demanding her attention. By evening, Sophie's stress had accumulated into a thick cloud of frustration. She felt the need to release it, to let someone hear exactly how she felt without sugarcoating anything. Normally, she might text a close friend or post a small vent on social media, but tonight she wanted something different, something more personal, something that could carry the exact tone of her irritation and exhaustion. She picked up her phone, found her best friend's contact, and started recording a voice message. Her voice was a mixture of exhaustion and humor as she spoke into the phone. She talked about the spilled coffee, the frozen computer, the unreasonable client expectations, and even her annoying neighbor who played loud music all day. She made jokes, exaggerated a little, and let her irritation come out in a way that was both honest and funny. As she spoke, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. She laughed at herself, realizing how absurd some of the things that had happened were. And she felt lighter for sharing them, if only into the microphone. In the rush to finally send the message, free herself from the day's tension, Sophie didn't notice that she had selected the wrong contact. Instead of sending the message to her friend, she had sent it to a number she didn't recognize. She realized only a moment later, staring at the phone with wide eyes. Panic fluttered in her chest for a second, but she quickly shook it off. "It's probably fine," she muttered to herself. "Who even answers messages from unknown numbers anyway?" Feeling slightly silly, but also relieved that she had vented her frustrations, Sophie set the phone aside and went to make herself a cup of tea. The warm steam rising from the cup felt comforting against the tension in her shoulders. She leaned against the counter, thinking about how small mistakes like this sometimes didn't matter at all. She didn't know who had received her candid message, and at that moment, she didn't care. What mattered was that she had spoken her mind. And somehow, that was enough to make the day feel lighter. As she sipped her tea, Sophie started to unwind further. She scrolled through her social media feeds, not really paying attention, just letting her mind wander. The city lights outside her window shimmered like a sea of tiny stars, reflecting her own mixture of exhaustion and hope. She felt a sense of calm creeping in, thinking that maybe tomorrow would be a better day, and maybe she could handle her job's pressures with a little more patience. She didn't know it yet, but the accidental message she had sent would change her evening and her life in a way she could never have imagined. The person who had received her message wasn't an ordinary stranger. They weren't just anyone scrolling through unknown messages. And that simple, hurried mistake, which she thought would be insignificant, was about to set off a chain of events that would bring an entirely unexpected twist into her life. For now, Sophie remained blissfully unaware of the ripple she had created with a single tap of her finger. She finished her tea, smiled at the thought of finally being done with a difficult day, and went to her bedroom to get ready for bed. The phone sat on the table, quiet and ordinary. But inside it was the voice of Sophie, full of honest frustration, laughter, and a little touch of human vulnerability. That voice, meant for a friend, had already begun its journey to someone completely unexpected. Little did she know that tonight, the simple act of venting, of being herself without filters, would be the thing that drew someone extraordinary into her life. A single, accidental message had the power to change everything. And Sophie had no idea that the universe had already begun listening. Jonathan Hawk lived in a world that was completely different from Sophie's. As a billionaire entrepreneur, he had everything money could: buy luxurious cars, a sprawling penthouse, private jets, and access to places most people could only dream of visiting. Yet, despite all his wealth, Jonathan was a curious man who appreciated moments of unpredictability and raw honesty. He had spent years building his tech empire, and while he was often surrounded by people who flattered him or tried to impress him, genuine, unfiltered human emotion was rare in his life. He craved authenticity, even in the smallest doses. And it was something that always caught his attention when it appeared unexpectedly. On this particular evening, Jonathan was in his private office, a sleek, modern space filled with large windows that looked out over the city skyline. The office was quiet, almost eerily so, as his assistants had long since gone home. He liked these moments of silence. They gave him time to think, plan, and sometimes even reflect on things he didn't normally have time to consider. He picked up his phone to check messages, emails, and notifications, something he did every evening to make sure nothing urgent had been missed. It was then that he saw it. An unknown number had sent a voice message. Normally, he ignored such things. Unfamiliar contacts were rarely interesting to him. But something about the timing and curiosity made him tap on it. When he pressed play, he heard a voice that was full of personality, frustration, and humor all at once. Sophie's words flowed freely, honest, and unrestrained. She talked about her day in a way that was relatable, amusing, and refreshingly candid. She described the spilled coffee, the frozen computer, the impossible client demands, and even a neighbor with irritating habits. What struck Jonathan immediately wasn't just the humor or the relatable complaints, it was the sincerity. Here was someone who wasn't trying to impress anyone, someone who was just herself. He found himself laughing out loud at some of her jokes, shaking his head at the ridiculousness of her day, and at the same time feeling a strange sense of connection to a voice he had never heard before. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, letting the sound of Sophie's voice fill the quiet room. He replayed the message, each time catching something new, a small inflection, a chuckle, a pause that seemed to reveal more than words could say. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, he felt entertained in a way that money could not buy. He thought about how rare it was to encounter someone so authentic, and a part of him was drawn to her courage to speak openly, even if she didn't realize who she was speaking to, unlike most people who would ignore such messages from unknown numbers. Jonathan was intrigued. He wasn't looking for anything specific, no business opportunity or networking advantage. This was pure curiosity. He thought about the probability of it being someone ordinary, someone just like thousands of others in the city. Yet there was something about her tone, the emotion in her voice, that made him want to know more. He wondered if her day had been as stressful as she described, if she was really as funny in person as she sounded in the recording, and what kind of life someone with such honesty lead. As he considered all this, he realized that the voice message was more than just entertainment. It was a window into someone else's life. He was used to people hiding behind masks, saying what they thought others wanted to hear. But Sophie's message was different. She was unfiltered, authentic, and completely herself. The humor, the frustration, the vulnerability, it all fascinated him. He felt an unusual pull, a desire to see the person behind the voice, to meet someone who could make him laugh and perhaps remind him of the simple joys in life that he often overlooked. Jonathan made a decision that was impulsive, unusual, and completely unlike his normally calculated approach to life. Instead of dismissing the message, he wanted to know who Sophie was. He called his assistant and asked for help in finding out where the number was registered. Normally, he didn't involve himself in something so trivial, but tonight was different. There was a thrill in unpredictability, a sense of excitement in doing something spontaneous. It was as if the voice message had broken through the walls of his carefully structured life and invited him into a small adventure he hadn't Anticipated while waiting for his assistant to gather the information, Jonathan replayed the message again. He paid attention to the laughter in her voice, the way she emphasized certain words, and the way her frustration seemed to mix with humor naturally. It wasn't just a message about a bad date. It was a glimpse into someone's personality, someone vibrant, relatable, and entirely real. The contrast with the people he usually met, who often seemed to care more about appearances than genuine emotion, was striking. He smiled to himself, thinking about how rare it was to find this kind of honesty and how unexpected it was to stumble upon it. In the most random way, by the time his assistant returned with the address linked to the number, Jonathan had already made up his mind. He wasn't just going to leave it at listening to the message or laughing about it quietly. He wanted to meet her, to experience firsthand the person behind that voice. It was a bold move, something spontaneous and unpredictable. He considered all the possibilities. She could be confused, annoyed, or even scared, but the curiosity and intrigue outweighed any hesitation. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in a long time, the thrill of the unexpected pulling him forward. Jonathan prepared to leave his office, opting for casual clothes instead of his usual designer suit. He wanted the encounter to feel real, not like a business meeting or a staged encounter. He drove through the city streets, thinking about how unlikely it was that a simple, mistaken voice message could lead him here. Yet, he felt a sense of anticipation and excitement. The randomness of the situation, the unpredictability of life, and the honest human connection he sought all combined to make this night feel extraordinary as he approached the location. Jonathan couldn't help but smile at the absurdity and charm of the situation. A voice sent to a wrong number had captured his attention completely, turning a mundane evening into something extraordinary. He parked the car, took a deep breath, and walked toward the building, ready to meet someone he had never met but already found fascinating. The city around him was alive, but his focus was on one person, a young woman, whose voice had pulled him into a story that was just beginning. Jonathan's heart raced slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. He was used to controlling everything in his life, but tonight he was letting unpredictability guide him. The voice message had been a spark, a glimpse into Sophie's world, and now he was about to step into it, curious, amused, and genuinely eager to meet the person who had unknowingly captured his attention. Jonathan Hawke had always been a man of precision and careful planning. Every move he made in life, whether in business or in his personal routines, was calculated. His wealth, his power, and even his reputation had been built on this careful control. Yet, as he walked through the city streets toward Sophie's apartment that evening, he felt a sense of exhilaration he hadn't felt in years. This was not something he had planned, not a calculated meeting or a business opportunity. This was pure impulse, driven by curiosity, intrigue, and the strange magic of a simple, accidental voice message as he approached the building. Jonathan could feel his pulse quicken. He was aware that what he was about to do was unusual, even bold. Most people in his position would have ignored such randomness, dismissed it as a minor distraction. But something about Sophie's voice, her humor, her honesty, had captured his attention in a way that nothing else had for a long time. It was rare to find someone so genuine, someone who could be herself without worrying about appearances or judgment. That rarity made him want to act, to step out of the confines of his meticulously controlled life and see where this unexpected moment could lead. He paused outside the building for a moment, taking in the sight of the city lights reflecting off the glass windows and the quiet hum of traffic below. In that pause, he thought about the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, a billionaire entrepreneur, walking through an ordinary neighborhood, heading to meet a complete stranger because she had sent a message to the wrong number. He chuckled to himself, feeling a sense of liberation in the sheer unpredictability of life. This was not something money could buy, nor could it be planned. It was spontaneous, exciting, and terrifying all at once. Jonathan's mind raced with possibilities. What if Sophie was annoyed? What if she didn't want to meet him? What if she thought he was some kind of stalker or prankster? Despite these thoughts, he couldn't bring himself to stop. His curiosity was too strong. He thought about the way she had spoken in her message, the laughter in her voice, the small pauses that revealed her personality, the honest frustration mixed with humor, and he wanted to experience that in person. He wanted to see if the energy he felt from her voice translated into real life. As he entered the building, Jonathan noticed the faint sounds of the city behind him, the distant chatter, and the hum of traffic. It all seemed to fade as he focused on the task at hand. He approached the elevator, pressed the button for her floor, and felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness. It had been a long time since he had felt anything resembling this kind of excitement, and he realized that it was thrilling precisely because it was so unplanned. For once, he wasn't in control. He was stepping into the unknown, guided only by instinct and curiosity. Meanwhile, Sophie had finished her tea and had just gotten ready for bed. Still unaware of the ripple effect her accidental message had caused, she thought her mistake would go unnoticed. The message would remain in the inbox of some stranger who might not even listen to it. She had no idea that her voice, full of honesty, humor, and human vulnerability, had captured the attention of someone extraordinary. In her small, cozy apartment, the lights casting a warm glow over her space, she was relaxing, feeling the day's tension finally lifting. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, her ordinary evening would turn into something unforgettable. Jonathan reached Sophie's floor and took a deep breath before stepping out of the elevator. He approached her apartment door, his hand hovering over the doorbell. For a moment he hesitated, imagining all the scenarios that could unfold. Then he pressed it, and the chime echoed through Sophie's apartment. He could hear movement inside as she approached the door. Sophie, startled by the unexpected sound, opened the door and froze for a moment. Standing before her was a man who looked completely out of place in her quiet, ordinary life. He was dressed casually, but carried himself with a confidence and calmness that immediately caught her attention. His presence was unexpected, almost surreal, and she blinked, unsure if she was imagining it. Jonathan smiled, a warm, genuine smile that put Sophie slightly at ease, despite the shock. He introduced himself simply, saying, "Hi, I'm Jonathan. I think you sent me a voice message by mistake." Sophie's eyes widened, realizing that her little accident had led to this moment. She felt a mixture of embarrassment, curiosity, and disbelief. Her voice had traveled through the air, through the phone, and had now brought a billionaire to her doorstep. The situation was almost too surreal to comprehend. The initial conversation was a mix of awkwardness and amusement. Sophie struggled to find words, trying to make sense of the bizarre situation. Jonathan, on the other hand, seemed genuinely entertained and intrigued. He asked questions about her day, laughed at the humorous parts of her message, and showed a level of curiosity and attentiveness that was both unexpected and comforting. The interaction, while brief, was filled with a sense of authenticity and connection that neither of them had anticipated as they talked. Sophie began to relax. The shock faded, replaced by a growing sense of wonder and excitement. She realized that this encounter, as strange as it was, had a certain charm. Here was a man, someone she never expected to meet, who had been drawn into her life by nothing more than honesty and a simple voice message. The randomness of it all was thrilling. She found herself laughing more freely than she had in days. Jonathan, too, felt a unique connection forming. He was used to people being impressed by wealth or status, but here, none of that mattered. Sophie's personality, her humor, her candidness, it was what held his attention. He felt a sense of warmth and amusement that was rare in his life, and he realized that this unplanned encounter was a refreshing change from the predictability of his everyday world. By the end of their brief meeting, both Sophie and Jonathan felt that something extraordinary had happened. A simple mistake, a wrong number, had led to an encounter that was unexpected, exciting, and memorable. It was a reminder that life could be unpredictable in the best possible way, and that sometimes the smallest accidents could lead to the most remarkable experiences. Jonathan left her apartment with a sense of satisfaction and anticipation, curious about what would come next, while Sophie remained inside, still processing the surreal reality of what had just happened. Their worlds, so different in every way, had collided through a single, accidental voice message, creating a story neither of them could have predicted, but both would remember forever. Sophie couldn't believe what was happening. One moment she had been winding down from a long, stressful day, and the next, standing in front of her, was Jonathan Hawke, the billionaire she had seen in magazines, news articles, and on social media, now smiling casually at her from her own doorway. Her heart raced, a mix of disbelief, nervous excitement, and curiosity. She blinked rapidly, trying to process the surreal scene. Was this really happening? Had she really sent a voice message to the wrong number and ended up with a billionaire on her doorstep? It felt like a dream, one so bizarre that she half expected to wake up any second. Jonathan, sensing her surprise, laughed softly, a warm, easy laugh that made the tension in the room dissolve slightly. "I know this must seem unusual," he said, his voice calm and genuine. "But I heard your voice message, and I couldn't resist finding out who you were." Sophie's eyes widened. She wasn't sure what to say at first. Her mind was spinning with questions, doubts, and the strange thrill of the unexpected. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Realizing that no words could fully capture how she felt in that moment, finally, she managed to speak, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't expect anyone to even listen to that message. Especially not you." She pointed vaguely, her words trailing off as if even acknowledging him fully would make the situation too real. Jonathan smiled, clearly amused and entertained, but also kind and unassuming. "I don't usually listen to random messages from strangers," he admitted. "But something about yours made me curious. It was funny, honest, real. I just wanted to see who was behind it." Sophie felt a strange mix of embarrassment and flattery. Her candid rant, which she had sent by mistake, had managed to intrigue someone she never imagined would even notice it. Jonathan stepped inside when Sophie hesitated. She motioned for him to come in, still unsure whether this was the right thing to do. But there was something about his presence calm, non-threatening, and approachable that put her at ease. He didn't carry the airs of a typical billionaire, the kind who often seemed distant and untouchable. Instead, he seemed genuine, curious, and surprisingly down. It was disarming, and Sophie felt herself relaxing slightly, though the surreal nature of the situation remained. As they settled into her living room, Jonathan and Sophie began talking. The conversation started cautiously, almost awkwardly, with both of them feeling the strangeness of the situation. But soon, it began to flow naturally. Jonathan asked about her day, listening intently as Sophie recounted the small frustrations and funny incidents she had mentioned in her voice message. Her honesty and humor shone through, and Jonathan found himself laughing and nodding along. It was rare for him to encounter someone who could speak so freely, without pretense or expectation. Sophie, in turn, found Jonathan unexpectedly easy to talk to. He wasn't asking questions to impress her, to evaluate her, or to control the conversation. He genuinely wanted to know about her experiences, her frustrations, and even the small joys in her day. The more they talked, the more Sophie realized that beneath his public persona of power and wealth, Jonathan was a person who valued authenticity, humor, and connection. It was refreshing, and she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated. The conversation shifted naturally from her day to broader topics. They talked about dreams, ambitions, and the strange twists life sometimes takes. Sophie laughed at Jonathan's stories from his business ventures, which included moments of both failure and triumph. Learning how even someone as successful as him had faced challenges, doubts, and setbacks. It was comforting for her to see that even people who seemed larger than life struggled with the same kinds of problems everyone else did. In turn, Jonathan enjoyed Sophie's perspective on life, her creative outlook as a designer, her ability to find humor in everyday struggles. Minutes turned into an hour, yet the time felt like it flew by. The awkwardness that had initially filled the room had completely vanished, replaced by a sense of ease, curiosity, and genuine interest. Sophie was amazed at how someone she had never met, someone from a world so different from hers, could connect with her so quickly. Jonathan, too, was surprised at how intrigued he was by her personality, her humor, and her candidness. What had begun as a random, mistaken message had transformed into a meaningful, engaging conversation that neither of them expected, but both enjoyed immensely. At some point, Sophie realized that she was laughing more freely than she had in days. The stress of her earlier frustration seemed distant, almost trivial, in comparison to the unexpected, genuine connection she was experiencing. Jonathan had a way of making her feel seen, appreciated, and understood, not for what she did or who she was supposed to be, but simply for being herself. That authenticity was rare, and Sophie couldn't help but feel a warm, exhilarating sense of comfort in his presence. Jonathan, noticing her ease, smiled inwardly. This wasn't a meeting about business or networking, nor was it a calculated social encounter. It was spontaneous, unplanned, and completely real. He appreciated the rarity of such moments in his life, and he was determined to savor it. There was a certain thrill in experiencing something unpredictable, something that broke through the ordinary routines and expectations he was used to. And Sophie, with her honesty, humor, and relatability, had brought that thrill into his evening. The two of them shared stories, jokes and observations, each moment reinforcing the unexpected bond forming between them. They discovered shared interests, differences that intrigued them, and a mutual curiosity that made the time together feel effortless. The accidental voice message that had brought them together now seemed almost magical. It's a small twist of fate that led to an extraordinary encounter. Neither of them could have planned this, and that unpredictability only made it more compelling. Eventually, Jonathan realized it was getting late, but he wasn't ready to end the interaction. He felt a genuine interest in getting to know Sophie better, and the thought of leaving without continuing this connection felt incomplete. Sophie, for her part, was still processing the surreal nature of the evening, but she also felt a strange sense of anticipation, wondering what this unplanned encounter might lead to. Both were aware that something unusual and remarkable had begun, sparked by a simple, honest voice message sent to the wrong number as he prepared to leave. Jonathan thanked Sophie for welcoming him in, expressing his appreciation for her openness and humor. Sophie, still amazed, realized that she had experienced something extraordinary, a brief, unforgettable encounter with someone whose life seemed impossibly far removed from hers, yet who had engaged with her as if her world mattered just as much as his own. They parted with a sense of curiosity and excitement about what could come next, the evening leaving a lasting impression on both of them. What started as a simple, accidental message had turned into a meaningful, surprising connection, demonstrating the unpredictable magic of human interaction. In that short, extraordinary encounter, Sophie and Jonathan discovered something rare: the joy of meeting someone unexpected who could bring laughter, insight, and a spark of adventure into their lives. That evening became a memory neither would forget. The start of a story born from chance, curiosity, and the courage to act on impulse. The night had settled into a quiet calm as Sophie closed the door behind Jonathan, her mind still buzzing with the events of the evening. She leaned against the door for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. Only hours ago, she had been exhausted from work, venting into her phone about the small, frustrating details of her day. She never could have imagined that one simple mistake, a voice message sent to the wrong number, would lead to meeting someone like Jonathan Hawke, a man whose name and face were known around the world. The absurdity of it all made her laugh quietly to herself, a mixture of disbelief and delight. Jonathan, on his way home, reflected on the encounter with a similar mix of amusement and wonder. He had expected nothing from a random message on his phone, but instead, he had found someone completely authentic, funny, and engaging. The spontaneity of the evening had given him a rush he hadn't felt in years. It reminded him that even in a life filled with wealth, power, and carefully constructed routines, there were moments of pure unpredictability and joy. Sophie's candid voice had opened a door not just physically, but emotionally into a world he rarely experienced, the world of genuine human connection without pretense. In the days that followed, Both Sophie and Jonathan found themselves thinking about the night repeatedly. For Sophie, it was almost surreal. She had returned to her normal routines, but the memory of Jonathan standing in her apartment, laughing at her stories and listening so genuinely, lingered like a warm glow. It made her see her own life differently. She realized that sometimes, even the smallest mistakes like sending a message to the wrong person could lead to something extraordinary. She found herself smiling at the thought that a voice message, something so ordinary, had brought an entirely unexpected twist into her life. Jonathan, meanwhile, couldn't shake the impression Sophie had made on him. He had spent years surrounded by people who often had motives, whether personal gain or flattery. Meeting Sophie had been refreshing. She had no idea who he was beyond the fame and wealth, yet she treated him with a natural curiosity and honesty that was rare in his world. He thought about her laugh, the way her voice carried humor and vulnerability at the same time, and the simple fact that she had been herself without trying to impress him. It was a reminder that life's most meaningful experiences often came unplanned. When one was least expecting them, they began to exchange messages. Continuing the conversation that had started so unexpectedly, the exchange was light-hearted at first, filled with jokes, anecdotes, and small observations about life. But gradually the connection deepened. Sophie found that she could share her thoughts freely, knowing that Jonathan genuinely listened. He, in turn, found that he could talk about things he rarely shared with others, his challenges, his ideas, and even the moments of doubt that his public image never revealed. Through these conversations, both realized that the accidental meeting had created a bridge between two very different worlds, one built on sincerity, curiosity, and mutual respect. As days turned into weeks, Sophie and Jonathan discovered more about each other. They talked about childhood memories, favorite books and movies, and the simple pleasures that brought them joy. They laughed over small, shared quirks, and even debated trivial things with playful intensity. Each interaction, whether through text, phone call, or video chat, added layers to their connection. What had begun as a spontaneous curiosity had grown into genuine interest and admiration. The accidental voice message had set off a chain of events neither could have planned, but both had embraced fully. Sophie began to notice subtle changes in her own life. The stress and frustration that had seemed so overwhelming before now felt manageable. The encounter with Jonathan reminded her that life could be unpredictable in wonderful ways. She approached her work with renewed energy and creativity, inspired by the idea that small moments could have unexpected, positive consequences. Even her friends noticed a difference in her demeanor. She seemed lighter, happier, and more willing to embrace the unexpected. The experience had taught her that sometimes life's surprises were worth taking a chance on. Even if they seemed improbable or strange at first, Jonathan, too, experienced a shift. He found himself appreciating the smaller, quieter moments in life more than he had in years. Meeting Sophie had reminded him that beyond the boardrooms, business deals, and public appearances, there was value in simplicity, honesty, and genuine human connection. He made a conscious effort to seek more of these moments. Whether by spending time in ordinary neighborhoods, engaging in conversations without agenda, or simply observing life outside the structured world he had built. Sophie's presence in his life, even indirectly, had become a catalyst for a renewed sense of perspective. Eventually, they decided to meet again, intentionally this time. The anticipation was different from the first encounter, less about surprise and more about curiosity and excitement. When they saw each other again, it felt natural, comfortable, and yet charged with the memory of the serendipitous way they had first connected. They explored the city together, laughed over shared stories, and continued the easy, playful conversations that had begun with a simple voice message. Each meeting deepened their bond, reinforcing the idea that extraordinary connections often come when one least expects them. As weeks turned into months, their friendship, or perhaps something more, continued to grow. Sophie and Jonathan discovered that, despite their vastly different lives, they shared values, humor, and a mutual appreciation for honesty. They learned to navigate the contrasts between their worlds, embracing the differences rather than being intimidated by them. The initial surprise of the accidental message became a fond anecdote, a reminder of how unpredictability could lead to remarkable experiences. Looking back, both realized that life was unpredictable and that some of the most memorable, transformative moments came without warning. Sophie often thought about how a simple mistake, a message sent to the wrong number, had led to one of the most extraordinary experiences of her life. Jonathan appreciated the rarity of finding someone who could spark curiosity, laughter, and genuine connection without pretense. Together, they had discovered the beauty of serendipity, the magic of chance encounters, and the power of being authentically oneself. In the end, the story of Sophie and Jonathan became more than just a tale of a mistaken message. It became a testament to the unpredictability of life, the value of spontaneity, and the way simple acts like honesty, humor, and openness could create lasting impact. Their connection, sparked by a moment that could have been forgotten or ignored, flourished because both chose to embrace it, to engage with authenticity, and to explore the possibilities that life had unexpectedly offered. Through this experience, Sophie and Jonathan learned that the universe often works in mysterious ways. A wrong number, a hurried message, and a moment of curiosity had led to a bond that neither expected but both cherished. It was a reminder that life's most remarkable stories often begin in the smallest, most ordinary ways, transforming lives in ways that are unpredictable, as profound and unforgettable. And so, from a simple accident, two worlds collided, creating a story filled with laughter, connection, and the promise of unexpected adventure, showing that sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them.